Hey guys. Sorry, I didn't see you guys there. You caught me. I was just doing a little bit of extra research before today's video. Let me get that out of the way. As you can see, we're in a slightly different set today, and the reason for that is I have been studying the last couple weeks to finally get my license as an official Drain Scholar. As most of you know, Blade's newest album, Spiderr, dropped just a couple of weeks ago, and I, along with many other fans, have been scrambling to understand all of the work's amazing references and spiritual teachings. After I released my reaction video, there were a bunch of comments asking if I could kind of go through some of the religious references or explain some of the things on the cover. I briefly touched on those things in that video, but even just people in the comments were getting more insightful than I was in that one, so I decided to take on a bit of a project, do a different type of video today, and go through all of the spiritual and philosophic kind of references and imagery that I could find throughout the album's lyrics. Now, I don't want to mislead you and make you think that this is going to be a fully comprehensive guide. There's only so much I can find out without being, literally a theological scholar. All of the information that I'm going to present to you today is based on, like I said, about a week's worth of research, and that's my own research on various websites across the internet, YouTube videos and essays, community comments on my video and others, Genius annotations. And while I won't be able to explain every one of these references or ideas fully in depth, I definitely want to go through all of them because I found some really interesting things about kind of the world, the theology of Spiderr. So grab yourself some tea and a snack, sit back, relax, as we take a spiritual and philosophical look at Blade's Spiderr. So the first main thing that I want to get out of the way before we go into anything else is that this album, Spiderr, is very, very... And I mean that completely seriously. While there have been plenty of religious references across Blade's last few projects, none of them have adhered so closely to a single religion, at least not so explicitly as Spiderr. Many of the other projects, I'm thinking specifically The Fool and Crest, will reference different kind of ideas that could allude to certain religions, but they aren't just as direct about imagery. We'll get to a point later on this album where Blade literally mentions that he's looking at the Star of David. And I just want you to keep that in mind because I think it is a really interesting framework to look at a lot of the imagery we're going to be talking about today. And it's just interesting in general to me as a fan as I've tried to track Blade and Drain Gang's kind of spiritual interests throughout the years. So with that preface out of the way, let's jump into part one, where I'm going to be taking a look at the cover for Spiderr. Now, the cover for this album was certainly controversial, taking a vastly different approach from many of Blade's more abstract or ethereal cover arts. This one literally looks like Blade is a Tekken character. It was a little off-putting for many fans. I think he looks awesome, but it kind of looks like a piece of fan art for a video game. However, there are some very important clues to the kind of spiritual center of this album directly on the cover. I noticed in my reaction video that there seems to be some Hebrew text across Blade's forehead, and a commenter and a friend of mine both reached out to me and let me know that this text was actually very significant. The Hebrew text on Blade's forehead on the cover is the word emet, which means truth. And inscribed across his forehead, this is actually a direct reference to the story of the Golem. Now, the Golem is a Jewish folklore character that has been interpreted through many, many different religions, many different forms across various media, but the original story seems especially significant to the content of this album. There's a really fascinating Jacob Geller video essay about the Golem that I recommend you watch, but I'm going to be using some information from that video to kind of explain this cover art. So the Golem is essentially a protective figure for the Jewish people. He is created out of clay, and then with the magic word emet written across the forehead, he is brought to life. One common misconception about the Golem is that he's like a monster and he's violent, but really in the story, at least used in this Geller video, and the one that is kind of the main, most common Golem story in the Jewish faith, Golem is used as a defender of the Jewish people. In this story, he's actually functionally a detective who's brought to life to help find out who's been committing murders that have been blamed on the Jews. But he also helps with various tasks around the community, acting as sort of a private eye, a shield for that community. Already, you may be seeing where this is going in relation to Blade. The idea of a defender that's molded by, their god or their religion to defend their ideas, protect their people, is very interesting. But there's another layer to this. That idea, molding a sentient creature out of clay, might seem familiar to you if you know anything about other Abrahamic religions. In Christianity, there's the, you were made from dust and to dust you will return. The idea that Adam, the original human, was created literally out of the earth. There is a similar idea in Judaism where some believe that Adam is actually the first golem who was created from the earth by God and activated in a similar way. This obviously has very interesting implications as, if you're assuming that Bladee is saying that maybe he is Adam or he is the golem, that's a lot to take in and has many implications. But also I think the idea of just, being formed from earth, being formed from clay makes a lot of sense. There are many references throughout this album to Bladee saying that, he's not special and he's just like everyone else, and that could kind of tie into this myth. However, I'm going to reference Geller's video again very briefly. Jacob makes a lot of really interesting connections from the Golem story to later post-Holocaust work by Jewish writers, referencing Elie Wiesel's retelling of the Golem, which to Jacob feels specifically post-Holocaust, and if you know anything about Elie Wiesel, that will make sense. But one point that Jacob brings up that I think is really interesting is his discussion of the centrality of language in the Jewish faith. Obviously, the Golem is birthed with the word truth, and in the story, there's a character taken away so that it just says death, and then the Golem dies. So, the language, the text, is very central to the Golem's power. Geller talks about how in Wiesel's retelling, he yearns for kind of the return of the Golem because the struggle of the Jewish people isn't over. But he mentions how kind of the text of these stories kind of is the Golem. You kind of can find, protection and defense through the things that you create. He'll say it more eloquently here.
The Golem is a story about many things, but at its most basic, it is a story about creating something, creating art, and then that art going on to protect you. It is a created object that was built to preserve the Jewish people. And in that way, the hundreds of stories about different golems aren't simply retellings of the original, a concept that barely exists. Instead, they are their own sculptures, continuing that legacy. Each one of them is a form of remembrance and renewal and preservation. They are golems in themselves.
And I think that that's very relevant to this project and for all of Blade's work in general. Throughout this project, Bladee vehemently defends, his worldview, his persona as an artist, the work that he's proud of and he's done. And I think that in some way, Bladee, the artist, the character, or at least the body of work associated with Bladee is kind of a golem. It is a protector for him and his ideas. But for Bladee, I think it's the word and the art equals the power, equals the magic that he's able to spread to his followers. I'm sorry if this is a little confusing. I myself am not Jewish, so it was kind of hard for me to make sure that I kind of got a grasp on all these different concepts. But I do think it's very important to note that kind of golem idea that's present on the cover. And now I think we should jump into the lyrical content. So what I want to do for this video is just mostly focus on lyrical content that references spiritual or philosophical ideas. Maybe not give you exactly what I think the meaning of them is. I don't even think I have my head wrapped around the album like that anyway. But we're not just going to go track by track explaining how the story develops. I want to just hit on specific beats and tell you guys, what the references are all across this album. So let's get started with the first track, Understatement. Understatement is really interesting as a track because it's one of the first times that Bladee has referenced his fan base and the effect that his music has had on them. Not just saying, oh, my fans do this or I get pictures taken of me, but really talking about how he wants his fans to understand the lifestyle that he is promoting, basically, through his music. There are a couple lyrical moments where he compares himself to a martyr, saying that he will die to make his fans realize that he is disgusted with kind of the hedonistic ways that they or others operate, and he wants to save them. It's very interesting that this song references being nailed to a cross, even though a lot of the album deals with Judaism. Of course, artists can use various metaphors in their songs, but as a commenter on Genius notes, in Judaism, Jesus is not God in the same way he is in Christianity or even a prophet, but simply a human. And this again is very important to kind of the idea of Bladee. Bladee makes constant lyrical references both on this album and on others about how he's like not special and he's just one of us. But he also will kind of contradict this by saying how much he wants people to understand his message, almost like he is trying to be kind of like that prophet figure. But I think that this contradiction is kind of like inherent to the human experience, right? Like he understands that he's, he's dust like everybody else, he's normal. He's another human like us, but he does have this gift of art that he can share with the world, and that does kind of give him some otherworldly qualities. Icarus 3 style is one of the most obvious references. This one talks about the Greek myth about Icarus, who flew too close to the sun using wax wings, causing them to melt and him to fall to his doom in the ocean and drown. This could be a bit of a reach, but I immediately saw there potentially being a bit of a link between kind of the clay idea and the wax on the Icarus wings. Perhaps Bladee depicting himself kind of as a golem on the cover is similar to Icarus getting too close to the sun. Bladee doesn't want to show himself as being, too important of a figure because he might get too close to the sun and then that might be his downfall. There's also the line of him saying, hope I don't flop again later on the album. So I think that it is in his mind. He doesn't want to get too close to maybe these ideas where it could end up harming him. There's a great line on here where Bladee says, navigate the mystery, pull reality out of fiction, which I think is just a great explanation for how he uses all of these spiritual ideas basically in his art and to influences his real life. Regardless of if he truly believes them or not, or regardless if you, the listener, do, there are lessons that can be taken from all of these. And that's a great way to kind of tie in again to the Icarus myth, because, at this point, many people just believe Greek myths are just that, just myths. But he says you can take reality out of fiction. You can learn lessons from those characters. And then again, we have another reference to the I'm not special idea, where he says, we're not special, but still they idolize us. This specific instance of this idea is actually very interesting because earlier in this exact verse, Bladee says that others are just not up to par and how there are blessings coming his way. So this is interesting because obviously it's another one of the contradictions, saying he's not special, but at the same time he has experienced many blessings in his life. But I think one line that's really sticking out to me right now as I look back at this is the, guess they like how I talk on the songs, turn it into an art. This is reminding me a lot of what we talked about in the beginning with the art becoming the golem and the protection for the artist. But then later Bladee says, perfection is just illusion and a punishment of love. You can kill me with a touch. I'm flying too close to the sun. So even though it's clear that Bladee sees his art as having a higher purpose, he is also aware that making kind of these references or seeing himself as above anyone else is putting him too close to the sun, which kind of, again, goes back to what we were talking about with the golem at the beginning. Blue Crush Angel is the next time we get another specific reference to Judaism, and on this song specifically, it's a reference to Kabbalah. Kabbalah is a sort of Jewish mysticism. I won't really go too deep into it here because it has a very long on your own. But just to give you a quick example, Kabbalah is the magic that was required to bring the golem to life. That's what activates the emet on his forehead. And at least in the golem story, one of these kind of more foundational stories, it's done by, very high up priests, very, very important religious figures in Judaism, not just the average person. Nowadays, there's kind of some new agey Kabbalah practice among, normal people that get into it, but I think that's another important piece, kind of, again, thinking about that hierarchy and kind of who has the ability to do these magic acts. Bladee says that he doesn't do it for the fame, he does it for the ain. This is another one that I will direct you kind of in the direction of doing research, but can't totally provide a ton of information myself. But this is a reference to Ein Sof, which is basically the eternalness of God. In Judaism, at least in some sects, it's very important not to say the name of God, and this Ein kind of references that sort of experience. It's not the named God. It's not like the personified, understandable God. It is like the essence of godness that is infinite. The word, I guess, can be translated either to like nothing or infinite. Again, those contradictions being on polar opposite sides of these huge ideas. But basically, Bladee is saying he doesn't do it for fame, but does it for the essence of godliness, the very core, the very center of these ideas. Forget the name of the people, kind of like we should forget, Bladee, the performer, the idol, and kind of try to get to the essence of the ideas. I'm sure this is probably blasphemous to someone because, again, I think the Ein Sof is very much supposed to be a, non-nameable, non-understandable thing, so suggesting that, Bladee saying his lyrics are like that might be kind of insane to some people, but that's sort of what I got out of the research that I did. The Ein Sof is also related to these 10 Sephirot, which are the 10 emanations through the body, like through which the Ein Sof can interact with the person. You may have seen these types of charts before. It's interesting because in the song, Bladee also says 3 stars, but 6 points on the star, and the Star of David has 6 points. But this also could be a reference kind of to these maps of the soul and the body. I think it's very interesting how kind of Bladee gets into numerology and geometry and kind of explaining these things. Again, something else that I am fully not prepared to talk about and would require a lot of research to accurately put into a video, which I can do if you want. But again, I kind of want to just give you a tour guide through the references for this video. Next up is kind of a big one. This is Disaster's Prelude, where we talk about Beatrice is brought up a few times. This is a reference to Dante's Beatrice. Dante, as in Dante's Inferno, or the Divine Comedy, where he takes a trip basically through heaven, purgatory, and hell. It's a very famous epic poem. And in the story, Beatrice is actually the one that sends Dante's guide, who helps him through the journey of the afterlife. She appears at the end of the purgatory section to basically continue guiding Dante into paradise because Virgil, his original guide, can't enter. She basically is a representation of love, and she is basically a divine and pure being. In the song, Bladee and Echo talk about how Beatrice still lives to believe in the myth, and throughout the song they talk about the bliss of innocence and believing in kind of the higher spirit. So perhaps this is kind of another allusion to the perfection that Bladee referenced earlier that he's always striving for. I'm actually kind of annoyed I missed this one because maybe an easier way to understand this would be Beatrice from the cartoon Over the Garden Wall, which itself is a reference to Dante's works. And I had literally watched it the day before, missed it in my reaction, and my friend texted me saying, "Didn't you literally just watch Over the Garden Wall? It's Beatrice." So that's on me. There's also a lyric in the song, "Believe in the Myth," which relates to that other line, I believe, taking reality from fiction. I think that it's saying these types of figures, regardless of if they're literally saying the myth is literally true or not, I think it's saying take these figures, what is your Beatrice, what is your Inferno, what is your journey, and take those into your life in some way, which I think is kind of a beautiful and is very true. That's why we have stories and stuff. Next up, we got Ha Ha Ha, which is another interesting one because it has the 3 threes, Holy Father, Son, and me. Now, this is a crazy one, not only because I talked about how there's a lot of Judaism in this album, and Bladee is, you know, making a very obvious, like, Christian reference here. It's interesting because it's not Father, Holy Spirit, and then me, the man. It's the Father, the Son, Jesus, and then me, Bladee, the Spirit, which I think is very, very interesting. I think this kind of relates back to the idea of the essence, kind of the work being the most important. There's 3 threes, you know, these trinities, and I'm at the center as I'm the idea of these. I'm kind of like the mystical, otherworldly embodiment, not a figure in any way, which I think is very interesting as well. Dresden ER makes another reference where Bladee literally says at the top and down below, it's the Star of David. That's definitely one of the most explicit references, literally saying like, I'm seeing the Star of David. But this, I think, is one of the most critical references, and probably the reason that Bladee got interested kind of in Judaism in general, or using it in this album. So I did some research on the Star of David and kind of the mystical significance of it, and I found some really interesting things. First of all, in Hebrew, it's literally called the Magen David, or the Shield of David, and of course we all know how often Bladee is talking about shields in his work, but also to the untrained eye, this looks like a star design, you know, with the 6 points, but really it's 2 triangles that are flipped on top of each other, and these triangles actually are supposed to relate to 3 entities that are connected to each other, the Holy One, the Torah, and Israel. The Torah being, you know, the holy text of the Jewish people, and Israel being the people themselves. Now, I won't go into too much detail about the meaning of these 2 triangles, as I think that is a job for someone with a lot more knowledge than I have. However, I will just include the information that basically these 2 triangles are meant to represent the intersection between the exoteric and the esoteric ideas of Judaism. The exoteric being kind of the tangible things, like the text of the Torah and the teachings of religious leaders, and the esoteric being the spiritual inner work that a Jewish person has to do. And this is yet another relation to kind of the conclusion we came to with the Gollum story, relating back to the relation between the work and the text of an artist and kind of the inner soul, the spirit, and the ideas that it's trying to translate. I also did see online that some people kind of see the Star of David and the combination of these 2 triangles sort of as the idea of as above, so below, meaning what happens in kind of the esoteric realm is linked to what happens on Earth. Like, you know, our inner and outer worlds are connected through the practice of, you know, this religion. Which I think was very interesting, because if you think about what the Drain Gang mantra is, its loss and gain are the same. The Star of David is obviously symmetrical. There's many references, like I was saying, to geometry and numerology throughout Blade's newer works, with the symmetrical 3s, the 9s flipping up and down, 5 stars on the crest. There's so many of these ideas of things being symmetrical and existing at the same time, nothingness and infiniteness. And I think this is one of the most explicit and direct references. Finally, we move to Uriel outro, which is another direct reference. This one I kind of had some trouble with, because a lot of different sources I was looking at were saying that Uriel is different things. So this is according to Wikipedia. Uriel in some Christian traditions is associated with beauty and light, and holds a Greek Ionic column, which symbolizes perfection and aesthetics in man-made beauty. This kind of relates to the Genius annotation for this song that says, Blade has spoken about artistic perfection, saying, my work is about trying to express the perfect thing I'm imagining. I hope that at some point my whole body of work can come close to that idea of perfection. I think that's a pretty good idea for this song. That at least lines up the most with the ideas that Blade has been exploring. And again, this relates to kind of the symmetry idea where things are kind of perfectly in balance. But there's another article I read here that says Uriel in Judaism is a leading angel, sometimes ranked as an archangel. His name in Hebrew means fire of God or light of God, and he has been identified as an angel of thunder and earthquake, as the wielder of a fiery sword in driving Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. Generally an angel of terror, prophecy, and mystery. There's also a couple of other notes here. I guess Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote a poem called Uriel, where Uriel is a symbolic and mythical advocate for his own theory of poetics. Now, this kind of complicated things and made it really interesting. I think especially this line where they describe Uriel as a angel of terror, prophecy, and mystery. It feels like those things are all very different. But I think that idea where Uriel is the angel that is a driving force is very important to the idea of Spiderr. Spiderr feels a lot more active than the last few Blade albums. I mentioned this in my reaction, but the last few Blade albums, there's a spirituality that feels very helpless, kind of a loss of agency, specifically with the Fool, you know, someone that's blissful in their ignorance. They're accepting that there's this magic, this wonder in the world, but they don't really affect it. They just exist in it and kind of observe it happening. Spiderr, there is much more of a kind of militant feel to some of these songs. Kind of the craziness, the paranoia, but also the I'm disgusted by the way you operate and I am bringing, you know, light or some idea to the table. I think that kind of connects with Uriel being sort of the closing track, this hymn towards this angel of kind of prophecy, of magic, of action. And again, the light, the fire for God, going back to the Ein Sof, to the essence. Someone who's the spirit, Father, Son, and me. That just feels like that all ties in very, very strongly. Now, again, I am not the person really to be kind of deciphering all this work. However, I thought it would be kind of cool just to give you this sort of tour guide through the different references, maybe kickstart some of the ideas. And I'd love to see if you guys have discovered anything in the lyrics in the comments below, or what you think of some of these references. Am I way off base with any of these? Please let me know. I really hope you guys are enjoying the album and kind of all the meat that we can kind of sink our teeth into, both lyrically and musically. I think it is definitely got some of the strongest production and songwriting of a lot of Blade albums. But let me know what you think in the comments down below, and let me know what kind of videos you would want to see next. But that said, I've got an interview to read, so I'm gonna get back to this. If you didn't finish your tea or snack, please enjoy it. Like the video if you enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one.